As a police leader who has responded to many mental health calls, I recognize the need for tools that enhance collaboration between behavioral health and law enforcement. Gelada simplifies co-responder and crisis response programs with smarter data and communication solutions. For a demo, visit julata.com or check the show notes. That's JULOTA.com. All right, I'm really excited to share with you the new Blue Grit Police Testing and Hiring Guide that's live on the website. Really, this is the culmination of everything I've learned about police testing from the time I came in myself and had to figure out trial by fire what it was that agencies wanted. At the same time, how to showcase my best version of myself, right? It's not about being something that you're not, but it's about understanding each stage in the game so you can present the best way. In my guide, I go in everything about the hiring landscape right now, how to develop your mindset, what to expect, and how to show up. So it's about knowing yourself well, like identifying strengths, weaknesses, how to conceptualize this, how to articulate this, and then going into the test itself. So written, physical components, interviews, everything that we're looking for there, the background, what that entails, polygraph, psych eval, medical, what these things all are, what they're trying to yield or determine, and then how you can make sure that you are showing up to be effective so you're not wasting your time, stress, money, all the angst of waiting for this extremely long-term process to go through. So just show up the right way, your best way the first time. Again, you can find that at bluegritwellness.com. Go to the shop. So it's bluegritwellness.com/shop.
Jeez, that's pretty harsh. It's like, I'm not even human. It's like, this guy's never worked in a big city. What a loser.
Yeah.
Thanks.
At the same time, that's kind of how the culture can be, like in law enforcement and outside. But people could also judge a big city cop because they know that the job is very different. Like, oh, you've never had to, handle a whole investigation. You just hold the scene and then wait for detectives to come in and all the specialty units and this and that.
I think we lose what you do matters a lot. And I see that all the time when I have normal cop on who does not have a book and who's not on TV. And the response I get to the average Joe, the citizen that is blissfully unaware of what you deal with, is shocked and impressed.
Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, ladies and gents, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric, and today I'm joined by podcast legend, law enforcement officer from the East, Massachusetts, coming from Massachusetts, Steve Gould. Steve, thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, my pleasure. Honored to be on, brother. Yeah, podcast legend. I like that. Hopefully one day I will accomplish that.
I think you are. I mean, for sure in the police space, which is, as someone outside of police pointed out, talking to me about my podcast, he's like, your audience is pretty niche. And in my head, I was like, no, it's not. I'm trying to niche down off of some feedback and just trying to find my lane and keep growing in the right ways. But it is, it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're doing is smart. I'm kind of a connoisseur of podcast coaching apps. It's kind of like my guilty pleasure. I love the podcast influencers that like give you tips and tricks and like talk about people who have had success and who didn't. And because I love podcasting. The whole idea of it ever since I first tried it was, to me, it was like blew my mind that anybody could essentially have a radio station. Anybody can have a voice and they can put it out there and the playing field's pretty equal. Like there's not even really an algorithm for podcasts, which can be frustrating, but you know what I mean? Like in the podcast world.
Yeah, it's double-edged, right?
Yeah, it's like word of mouth or like people just find you and they like you. I think it's a really great, I encourage everyone. I've actually helped a number of other law enforcement officers reached out and be like, what equipment do you use? How do you do it? I'll answer an unlimited amount of questions about it and help them get set up. I think it's great. But what you're doing, the niching down, to me is very smart. And you're speaking from a place of authority with your podcast. You have a lot of experience. You have a great rank for it. Commander really fits the bill for that type of, helping people out, and it's working. On the flip side, for me, I kind of was purely entertainment. Like I was like,
Mm.
I just want to hear really great stories. I love hearing
Yeah.
cop stories, and they're always so wild and cool. But that it doesn't. I guess what I'm saying is, maybe I'm getting too into the weeds and too geeky about it. But
No, you're good.
in the long run, although my show has a pretty great following for what it is, and for me not being anybody, just a cop who started it, it's pretty good. I'm very thankful for it. I
No, no,
don't.
not just a cop. We need to cut that from the vocabulary.
I know I need to
Shout
be
out to
straightened
Jess
out here.
Flores. But yeah, we do say that a lot in the
Yeah,
industry.
yeah, and I mean just like a no name person. And but I don't speak from authority. I don't. I'm a I've always worked in a small department. I'm a sergeant now for a small place, and I'm like a fire instructor, but like I'm not really even that into that. Like because qualification, like I used to work
Something
at a
you do.
yeah, I used to work at a bigger place where you got to do it a lot.
Mm.
Like, like we had a bunch of summer specials come on. Someone would come back from being injured, have to be trained up. Like, but where I work now, it's like I might do it like once or twice a year. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it is like I have to get my instructor book out and be like, well, okay, what is the qualification? You know what I
Your
mean?
guys are listening to this. You're like, come on, Steve. But no, I venture that you're a humble dude and you're selling yourself short. But I think in so many ways, what is cool about your project is that people do it does expand past, let's say, like the niching down, because people do love true crime. They do love stories. They do. There is this affinity for like what cops do. It's the front line, front row seat to the circus that is humanity in so many ways. So
Absolutely.
it's like people love it. They love cops. They love these semi-reality or just full-on fictional stories, even when they know it's completely farce. But then to hear the non-farce, the true sense of it, straight from the horse's mouth, as it were, right? Like it's like their experience, and so many of your guests are very articulate, and some of them are, they're a little bit more uncomfortable because they're just, quote unquote, just cops, right? They're just sharing a story, and they're like, hey, I don't know
Right.
what you want to hear from me and why. But then they're so dynamic and they're so raw and genuine.
Absolutely. And it's so fun to get. Now, don't get me wrong. I love guests from every walk of life. A guy with the book, someone who's on TV. I've had people who are on famous on, and I've had people that are just coppers, And I don't mean just coppers, but that's their profession, cop.
Yes,
They're
it's
not trying.
actually, yeah, I think it's like a title, right? Because they're not promoting anything. They're not even promoting themselves. They don't have any social or whatever, right? They're just like, no, I'm just here because you kind of asked me to be here. And like, if it
Right.
helps, cool. And I think that there's this kind of altruism there too that people really resonate with.
Totally, absolutely. Like I get it. Like I get the guy with the book, and he's like, "We should put these links in." I'm like, "We'll talk about the book at the end." Blah blah blah. Don't worry, we'll get you a good plug. But yeah, the guy who just comes on, he's a deputy in the Midwest, and he's like, "I've been listening to the show for 4 years, and I think I got the stories now." I'm like, "Yes, you are actually the person why I started the show was to have
Yeah.
a cop on, because that is the wonder of the show, to have in people's eyes a normal professional police officer, the guy that works in your town for that little clandestine organization called the police department, where you're not really sure what goes on in there, have him come on and talk about the stuff he sees in these little communities. That to me is like, that is the best. That is like the perfect guest to have on, because it really does wow people, and it is kind of the point of the show to just get a greater appreciation for what cops all around the country are going to. And those guys who come on get such a kick out of coming on a podcast.
Hmm.
Like, but they're
It's exciting.
nervous in the beginning,
Yeah.
and then especially since the show's gotten bigger, it doesn't help with nerves. Where I'm like, oh yeah, we get so many
Hmm.
thousands of listens, and but once after the first 5 minutes and they get comfortable, they just have a blast telling the stories. It's just like two cops in the lunchroom or something chatting.
Yeah. That's what I love about it. That's where, you can't downplay your insight and expertise for essentially to get decades in the game, right? It is different than a layperson being like, well, what do you mean? Like, I don't understand half the things you said, or they're asking all the wrong questions, whereas you have the cultural competency to ask all the right questions. And I'll say, man, when I came on your show the first time, I was super nervous. Like, I knew that you had a strong show, a strong following. I was still trying to find my footing in all of this and just trying to be helpful. And that's still like where I come from, but it is kind of a double-edged sword when you have the awareness of, man, if I speak on some points, I can convey my story a little smoother, perhaps, less clunky. But at the same time, some people, when they're just in it, just having that conversation, that's where I think it's the best, because as a host now, I can tell, you can tell, right? You can tell when people they have like 20 points that they feel they need to hit in this interview. It's like one and done. And so many people, I try to remind them now. I'm like, hey, like, you don't have to, actually don't try to get it all in, because I like to keep it organic. The conversation goes wherever it goes. But if you feel like you have to hit these points, like, people they might not be with you at that pace. It's a pretty fast pace to do that.
Yeah, there's always, I think as a host, you'll agree, there's always like after the interview, you're always like, oh my gosh, there was that huge thing we were going to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't want to interrupt the flow of like an organic conversation, because that's what appeals to people's ear. If it's forced or it's like kind of awkward, it can kind of lose people. But I thank you for the compliment. And I always say, like, when other cops ask me about it, I go, I've been in the profession long enough where I know enough to, like, I've never been on a SWAT team, but I know enough about them to ask some questions about them.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and it kind of helps, like, if I'm totally like, I know about a SWAT team, or I know about snipers, or I know about a fire investigation a little bit, I can ask some questions that I don't know. And I have no problem saying, what is
Oh yeah.
a wall banger? Like,
Mm-hmm.
explain that to me. Because I've heard of it, but I don't really know. So, like, Sandy, from who invented the wall banger for the SWAT teams, came on and
Mm-hmm.
he talked all about that stuff. So I know just enough to ask I'm involved in the culture enough just to ask questions. And to comment on when you first came on, you were a great guest. It was a popular episode.
Thank you.
And I told you then, I think after we talked, I said, you should definitely have some success. Number one, you spoke well, but number two, you have a good voice for it. You have like a radio-ish voice. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
it's
It's
usually
nice
is
to.
followed up by something else, right? It's usually like, you have a voice, you have a face for radio, right?
Yeah. Oh, I've been told that a bunch of times. So
No, it's not true. Don't
if you
listen
can
to them.
if
The
you can
haters.
imagine, by other cops who are like, they love to say it. I'm like, all right, that's fine. I'm not disagreeing. I have 3 kids and a wife, so I got nothing to worry about. I could look like a bridge troll. I'd be happy.
Well, clearly you're not that bad, because you got 3 kids and a wife, right? Like, there's
Right.
that other flip.
She
And
wears
people are
glasses.
just, ooh, so she knows. So that's the flip, is like, she has corrected eyesight and she's still committed to this situation. So, no, I mean, there's just this negative, pervasive culture, just especially with the internet, and you're doing anything different, and
Yeah.
you're sticking your head out, and you're kind of inviting it. I was talking to a buddy actually today, catching him over the holidays, and he's out of state, and he's a big traveler, and even with kids, like, started traveling and or continued to. He was talking about the podcast and asking me questions because he just learned I was doing it. And then he was sharing some of his reflections on YouTube, like posting travel videos, and some have done really well because they're these really uh, less traveled places, or definitely less publicized, so
Yeah.
people are finding it. He said even people from that town that initially were excited that he was there and like kind of showcasing that town, there are other people from the town be like, you didn't even go to the cool places, you dummy, right? Like, just like this negativity is like, come on, man. Like, I'm just sharing, right? And then someone else posting like, you are literally the ugliest person I've ever seen in my life. And he's like, dude, I'm not like, I don't think I'm a model or anything, but like, really the ugliest person you've ever seen in your life? Like, okay. Let's
Dude,
power
that's
down
how I
here.
know if one of my videos, like we were talking before we started recording, I will dabble in reels and I hate it.
Mm.
But I know when it's starting to pop, when I start seeing negative comments coming, because it's gotten outside the bubble
Oh
of
yeah,
my
yeah,
listeners. And it's kind of like, who's this ginger moron, or, whatever flavor they want to mix in.
yeah.
Look at this pasty idiot, or he doesn't know anything. And I'll get even like really insulting ones. Like, I'll have like a law enforcement legend on, and they'll be like, they will just degrade my police career.
Mm.
And I've never said that I'm always careful to say, like, when someone says, oh, you worked at LAPD, I'm like, well, I worked as a civilian for the background division. I wasn't on patrol. Like,
Mm.
I'm always careful with that, just so I'm not like, stealing valor or anything.
Stolen valor. Yeah, I was
Yeah,
thinking
still
same.
in police valor. But they'll be like, this cop, he's so out of this guy's league. How could this guy even have a conversation with him? Like, geez, that's pretty harsh.
Mhm.
It's like, I'm not
Yeah.
even human. It's like, this guy's never worked in a big city. What a loser. I'm like, dude,
Yeah,
thanks.
at the same time, that's kind of how the culture can be, like, in law enforcement and outside. But people could also judge a big city cop because they know that the job is very different. Like, oh, you've never had to just, handle a whole investigation. You just hold the scene and then wait for detectives to come in and all the
Right.
specialty units and this and that. And so you get a lot of hate and just, I mean, NYPD is probably the most, I suppose, they are the highest receivers of that negativity because they are what, like 40,000 cops. So it is just a different animal, right? It's
Yeah.
it's a city unlike any other in the world. And so of course, like your average patrol cop is going to do a job very different than you or I. And it's even to say, like, you're kind of like, well, you come from a place of authority. For myself, being mid management, like I was wondering if my promotion would hurt my, I suppose, reach and like the voice that it's
Your
coming from,
street
because the
cred.
sarge, yeah, because the sarge is like that, hopefully that one guy or gal looking out for you in what seems like a world against you at times. But then you go to brass, you go to management, and then it's like, okay, now everything I say to some maybe an increased credibility, but to a lot of my audience, I worried for sure that it would remove a lot of that because, oh, you're saying that because you have to, or you're saying that and you don't do it, or you didn't do it. And I think all the reason why I'm trying to bring that up in light of everything we've been talking about is you got to do things because you believe in them, and you got to put out, that positive constructive energy, and the ones that are going to come aboard will come aboard, and then kind of, brush off the rest, because that's just how life is if you do anything different.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I even feel it like I get I'm not embarrassed at all of the podcast, but I don't promote it like in my life. Like I don't like people
Yeah,
ask me all the time who are fans that I know in person,
I know what you're yeah,
and
I
they'll be
know what
like,
you
why
mean.
don't you have like carry your stickers with you or give them your card that because I had a bunch of cards made up,
Hmm. Yeah.
excuse me. And I'm like, I don't know. I just don't like sometimes like if I'm working like a road job and I'm working with a bunch of like linemen or something, and I notice they have stickers on their helmets, I'll be like, hey guys, I have a podcast and I'll chat with those guys for 45 minutes. I think because
Mhm.
they're out of the police bubble, it feels more comfortable and they think it's fascinating. They're like, wow, you have a podcast? That's wild.
Yeah.
And I've actually had them comment on episodes and like give me a rating and reviewing just because I gave them the sticker and stuff.
Oh, cool.
But like recently I was at firearms instructor, like teach the teachers research.
Hmm.
And we came back from break and there was a name of a podcast on the board. And the kid who was in the class, like he had the balls to go up there and go, I've got a podcast that interviews like experts in the police world. And I want this room of 70 cops to know about it. So he went up on the blackboard and wrote the whiteboard and wrote his podcast. And I thought,
Hmm.
good for him. Like he wants people to know about it. He doesn't care because what you get is, like you said, especially in the police world, it is there's a lot of backbiting. Like Steve's got this podcast, thinks he's special. What does he know? Why does he think he can have this podcast? Oh, Steve got on, I randomly got on ID Discovery show that was on HBO Max. And, I get screenshots from people like, what the hell is this? Why are you on TV? Like just to my text message, like, what's
Yeah.
going on? Now podcast, now you're on TV. And they're just busting my chops. But there is an underlying feeling of like, who does he think he is? And I never put that out. I never tried to be like a end all be all or a cop's cop or like, I'm solving homicides every week. I never do that at all. I try to just be me. I think I do a good job of just being who I am on the
Yeah,
show.
I think so.
And it doesn't really matter. So to people out there who feel like, who are afraid of that, you're just going to get that. And I think, like you said, it's just life, like anything in life. People who kind of just kept their head down and maybe they had aspirations to try something and never did, which is a lot of people, unfortunately, they're not going to back you initially,
Yeah.
at least.
Yeah, and there's a tangible, I suppose, connect to people even not doing things in the public space per se, or they're not doing like social media, or they're not doing a podcast, but they're not trying to self promote. They're just trying to share and invite people in. And so my example is, wellness, like police wellness, and that can look a lot of different ways for a lot of people in a lot of departments. But when I started sending out a lot of information, I got a lot of positive feedback of like, cool, thanks for taking the time to write this email and share some of these resources and all that. And then somebody else, shares that I think this is so corrosive that you're like pushing this out and it's making us all like annoyed, and we just delete it. And now we resent wellness. Like now we're like anti-wellness. And like someone kind of
I'm
had that
eating donuts
feedback.
every day now
I
because of
was like,
you.
yeah, like I'll just like just a F tongue, right? And then it's just like seriously, like an email which you can very much delete when you read the subject line because it says like wellness info, right? You can just delete it. Does it really create this like? Does it shoot cortisol through your body and really ruin your day? And if so, is that my bad? Is it really? So but I'll just say that that did get in my head, and I even talked to some peers and some folks at work about it. I'm like, yeah, I just don't know like how to reach people the right way. They're like, well, it's not that they're not the people, so
Yeah,
screw them, right? Um, and I think that there's that for everyone in police
absolutely.
culture.
I mean, in this space too, there is, I mean, you can tell like you're a genuine guy and you have good information and you walk the walk.
Thank you.
But you can tell there are people that like I would compare it to like the mindset or life coach people
Mm,
where they were like, I want to start a podcast. Maybe this will be it. And they're like, they really have no background in like expertise of anything,
mm,
but they do buy the followers. They do push out the shirt. You know what I mean? Like, and you
sure.
can tell they're not genuine. And
Yeah.
I'm sure that's who you were thinking in your mind. Like, I hope people don't think I'm that person. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They think I'm like a snake oil salesman type of person. You know what I
Exactly.
mean?
Yeah.
Same thing with even with this police entertainment podcast. There's some great ones out there, um, but there are some where like I won't name names, but I saw one and I was like, man, he's got all of a sudden it felt like, and I don't look all the time, but like every 6 months or a year, I'll search other just see how the competition's doing, see what they're doing, if they have any good ideas or whatever. And I noticed like one account had like over 100,000 Instagram followers. I'm like,
Mm,
damn, this guy blew up. So I went to his Apple podcast, I went to Spotify, and he had like under 50 reviews. And I'm like,
mm,
that's weird if he's got that many people. And then I noticed he's making a lot of shorts. But then if you go down and look at their posts, if you have 100,000 people and like 15 people are liking it,
yeah.
you have 100,000 people that are either checked out or they're not real.
Yeah.
Like you just said, I'm building a business and I know I need followers. That's part of the bill. Let me just
Yeah.
pay $2,500. And you know what I mean? And that
Yeah.
really like bothers me
Mm-hmm.
because it's like, as you know, we fight and scrape and stay dedicated and diligent to release schedules and content and making sure things are right and genuine. And it's a grind, man. I've been doing this. Excuse me, that's my water pump going off.
You're right.
I've been doing it 6 years, and it's taken every one of those years to get to where I'm at, and I'm nowhere near the size of a podcast that would like make me an income. You know what I mean? To like, I make some money, and I'm
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
grateful, and it's amazing. I make any. Believe me, I tell my wife all the time. I'm like, look, we got end of the month, we got $1,400 through ad revenue and Patreon. Almost
That's
pays the
awesome.
mortgage, which
Mhm.
is really cool. But like I said, it was a grind, 6 years. Then to see someone just start up and be like, let me go ahead and purchase 100,000 people. It's like,
Yeah.
dude, it
Yeah.
bothers me.
Yeah, it's double edged for sure. And like I feel that, right? Like even the last kind of point we are talking about where you want to share because you're excited about it, but you don't want to come off as like self promoting. It's just like, you said it yourself, you love podcasts. That was me too. Like I've been absorbing podcasts for years and years and years, right? But like before anyone was really talking about it very much, it's just kind of this different format where you could get a lot of information in this very unique form, right? This long form just discussion where people could
Yep.
share so many things beyond a blog post, beyond like a little clip. And you are kind of fighting this cultural thing where attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. But my challenge personally is like, okay, like I believe in this and people provide such meaningful feedback that we're going for depth, not breadth, right? We're not just trying to get more and more. At the same time, the social media thing is hard, right? Because we were talking before the thing started, but it's like there are people that absorb social media and absorb the content, but they might not be podcast people. But the analytics are so tough, and there is that point. I struggle with it where I'm like, dude, just do thing. You know why you started this thing. It wasn't to make money, and I also feel super grateful to have some sponsorship. Like that's fantastic, right? But the hours and hours and like just cumulative days over the last couple of years, that's not what it's for. It's great to get that on the return, right? That's not why I do it, but
Right.
at the same time, like trying to grow, it's always, I think you could connect this to any sort of like work ethic or attempt to develop. But there are parts of me that are like, just do your thing. You know why you do it. But then I'm like, oh man, am I just like accepting comfort and am I resigning myself to not try harder? Um,
Yeah.
even things like there is a service that full disclosure, like I signed up for the service because it was peddled as helping you build organic followership, right? So real people,
Yeah.
not bots, all that. I'm not happy with how it's turning out so far because, yeah, like numbers mean it's easy to get the dopamine reward, but then you're like, actually, this doesn't translate to anything. So that's super unfortunate.
Yeah, I just the other day I was looking at one because they pop up, especially if you have a show.
Exactly.
And, you can tell the fakes, but some of them, like you said, I was just reading one and I was like, maybe because it is, I mean, you do want to reach more people and it is tough. There's no real algorithm for podcasts. And why not reinvest in the show a little bit? You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So
Exactly.
I almost delved into that one. But I didn't. And because recently I bought, you know what I got was a Overcast banner ad.
Okay.
If you go to overcast.fm, they list all the different subjects of podcasts, and the prices change all the time. If he's having trouble filling one, he lowers the price down.
Yeah.
So I actually had luck with that. I bought one for 30 days. It was $260. And same idea. I'm like, let me get the word out a little bit more. I'll reinvest in the podcast. And, I got over 70 subscribers. So when you think about that, I mean, it sounds like a lot of money, but 70 subscribers, like it said, went out to like 15,000 people and 70 saw the banner and subscribe.
Yeah.
But that's 70 more people that are going to hear the podcast, hear the people that come on, and hopefully download more than one episode. So that can
Hmm.
tumble into a bunch of genuine downloads. And from all the articles I read, that's one of the only ways to actually reach. Like you said, there's YouTube people, there's podcast people.
Yeah.
What's better than they're dedicated to Overcast? They love listening on that. And then a thing pops up in their genre. Hey, you were listening to a true crime story? How about cops tell their true stories?
Hmm.
That's like a nice way to reach like a real audience. Although, pretty pricey. I mean, $260 is.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not nothing, right? And like,
But it does go as high as I've seen true crime go up to 390, 500 for the
oh
month.
man. Yeah.
So like if you see a spot, you can keep checking back and get it. But it's the first time I've ever done anything like that because I'm just like, let me try. Let me
Yeah.
try to,
Yeah.
because the shorts and all that stuff doesn't really work to get the word out. But just to touch back on what you were saying about like there's a reason we're doing this. It seems like when I start feeling like, oh man, this is like a grind. I've been doing it for so long, and I work a lot of overtime. Like this last week, I was sick and I worked 4 doubles. Now, I'm not
Mm.
saying for woe is me, but I made the choice to have my wife
Yeah.
stay home
For sure.
with our kids, so I
Mhm.
agreed I will do this. But also, I want to spend time with the podcast. But then you get an email of a picture of somebody at a academy graduation, and they say, we listened to like you guys who came on, like you and all the other guests, and I listened to a bunch of them. I was on the fence. Here I am graduating police academy. That is like
That's dope.
that lifts. That's a wind beneath my wings, Eric. It's
Yeah.
just like damn, okay. That is, I mean, that alone, if I got one of those a year, that should be enough. Like some making baby coppers, people who will do the job, because God knows we need it. To me, that's a huge, huge motivator.
Yeah, yeah, it's fantastic and it is very rewarding. That's why you do it. And yeah, you talked about starting it for entertainment in some ways, but I mean, let's be real. Like it's a humanizing the badge in a really non-cheesy way. It's like people able to hear what
Right.
cops actually see, like things police see. That's the title of the show. I don't think we've actually said it yet, but um, things police see, and it's like what we deal with and like how we manage it in so many ways. And I think that that's such a meaningful effort, right? And it absolutely is entertaining too, right? It's the crazy stuff, it's the fun stuff,
Totally.
it's
Yeah.
the sad stuff, but the window into things that any cop listens are like, dude, I've been there. Like I've been there. And whether or not you are inclined to reach out to Steve, which if you're chewing on it, just do it.
Yeah. Please.
What do you have to lose? But at the same time, like it is creating that, I suppose, that environment where you're not alone, because even some topics that I posted about or spoken about, the less maybe the topics that aren't hit super often. We talk about OIS, we talk about critical incidents, but I've talked about and written about almost incidents, right? The time where you're taking the slack out of the trigger, or you have your finger on the trigger, and you're like, oh man, are we going? And you don't. And it resolves pretty peaceably, or like pretty smoothly, I suppose, to put it that way at that point, which is kind of crazy thing to say for outsiders, but cops would get it. Like, yeah, it didn't become a big thing. Like, guy
Right.
gave up. But that creates so much stress. And just to say that, so many people and cops reaching out being like, dude, you see me, like I've grappled with this incident and I don't even know how to talk about it because nothing happened, quote unquote, nothing happened. But in your brain, in your body, all these things happen. Um, yeah, so it's kind of just, I appreciate the being able to share story in the way that you do with so many people, and not to downplay yourself either, right? You are facilitating this conversation, and you have the awareness to do it.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I can't believe some of the stories they tell, and the advice, they motivate people to join the police force or at least have respect for it, and they're not always positive. Like
Mhm.
they're. I mean, we were touching on it a little bit before we started the recording, but it's like the job does wear you down. That's why it's so great you're doing what you're doing, because you almost do need somebody to tell you, flip your mindset with, like, look at the upside. What helps me a lot with that is my religion. I'm a Christian, and there's a lot in of that in the Bible of, like, why worry about tomorrow? Today's day has enough worries, or don't worry, you'll be taken care of, that type of thing.
Sure.
Um, and cops need to be told that, because so many guys I know with 15, 20 years on the job are just like, we say it on the podcast all the time. It's a job that you end up loving and hating at the same time.
Hmm.
Because there are calls you will go to and you just hate your job. And there are calls you go to when the outcome is what you want. And you're like, this is great. This is like, wow, it's ancient and important profession where you literally make a difference in people's lives. And you're not, you don't have to be, you don't have to have a doctorate. You don't have to have a master's. You don't have to, you know what I mean? You can just have the right attitude and the right mindset, get into police work, and you can make a real difference, which to me, I think is why half the movies are made about cops. Half the popular TV shows are cop shows. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
they,
Hmm.
you can get the feeling if you listen to the like 10% of the country that they hate us, but the culture shows otherwise in a lot of ways. Like there's a
Yeah.
lot of attention paid to cops and what they go through. But it is tough, man. Like I get the question, Steve. So like I have a sponsorship coming up, which is like, I can't really talk about it yet, but we have to sign
Hmm.
the ink, and it's like, it's a company that is like sells police gear to officers retired and security and stuff. And it's a pretty good little contract, and that will be on top of the Patreon and the ad inserts I get. And people will ask, like, well, what would it take for you to stop being a cop? Like, would you? What if the podcast started making 15 or 20 grand a month?
Hmm.
Would you think about it? And I was like, yeah, I would do it, like, right away.
Yeah.
I
That's
would
healthy. That's
definitely.
healthy. Yeah.
I mean, because I have the option too, where I could stay on as a reserve, keep my foot in the game, and help the
Hmm.
department.
Hmm.
Because I do have some, I have a good relationship with the chief, and I do have some admin functions that I could continue to do, and I think he'd be open to it. But yeah, I would. It's been 20 years in law enforcement to me is respectable. 15 years, 10 years is respectable. Everybody's got their limit. It's a,
Yeah.
it's a hot, intense job where you run your body on nitro. Way more than other jobs. And if I could make an impact through the podcast and it would support my family, then hell yeah, I would do it. I would definitely start that chapter in my life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not because I hate the job, but because, you know, a lot of states used to have 20 and out, 25 and out, 25, 75, stuff like that. I don't think that's a bad thing. Like Massachusetts has lengthened it to you have to be 62 with 32 years on for all the new recruits. You really
Jeez.
want 62-year-old patrolmen running around? Like, no,
Yeah.
like, pay
I mean,
these
we're
guys.
supposed to be living longer and all that, but like, are we living better? And I think that that's a
Yeah,
struggle to picture that healthily.
they say cops, the average age is 57. They keel over after retirement. That's
Yeah.
terrible.
Which is like so much of that. I mean, there's so many points in what you just said, but yeah, it's that over identity. Like, if you have this extremely lucrative like opportunity to go full time in something you love, interacting with a job that you've known and done and love, and paying it back, and you're paying it forward, you're keeping your foot in the game, I suppose, because you're sharing all these insights that are helping people start the career, navigate the career, continue the career, like all this stuff. Like, at a certain point, there has to be an enough point, where you have that
Right.
opportunity because you've done the thing. And it's like the next chapter, the next adventure is something that we should all be striving towards in life. And that is something that I want to do through Blue Grit. Like, I want to have people develop their sense of agency, invest in themselves so they can be the best in this job and also beyond this job, because we all have a shelf life, right? Like, sometimes it's determined 100% by us, which is awesome. But even what you said, right? Like these different amounts of tenure are really impressive and respectable. And at the same time, people feel, and I've had episodes on this too, where people have left and they're like, man, I feel like I'm just like out. And that's a struggle that we've heard so many times from military veterans. But that's like common for military veterans to put in 4 years. And meanwhile, we're like, hey, thanks for doing that commitment that most everyone refuses to do, right? Like they don't sign up for that. And at the same time, like you have this uniquely different challenge in law enforcement. And if you do 3 or 5 years, is that like not good enough? You served your community in this way where you have to put a gun and a vest on to protect
Right.
your own life and others. But you only did 5 years, so like
Right.
you're
That's
not
a good
really
point.
in it.
Yeah.
You're not
Yeah.
really that, you weren't that dedicated. And so no, I love that you acknowledge that, because I think that most people should have that healthy recognition that maybe in doing that, you actually help law enforcement more than you're pushing a patrol car. And that's obviously clearly anyone, don't take that out of context. We need people to push patrol cars and do that valuable work, literally saving lives and changing lives daily. But for you, in having this experience of what you said, 6 years, like this is a dedicated skill and craft that you've been refining for 6 years, and you're able to reach some people on this way different scale than most people can do.
Yeah. You're coaching me up. I like it. Making me
Yeah,
feel
man.
better.
Yeah,
I
man.
like it.
So, and we've talked a lot about the podcast, and I love it because there is that correlation. Even people are like, I'm not a podcaster, but a lot of people that tune in have been on the show, and they're building their own networks. But then even people, to take it back to people in their own departments, right? They might not be podcasting, but they're delivering training. They're influential members. They may have rank official, or they may have roles like unofficial, influential leaders. You know, so I think that there is a translation that people can hear. I don't think we covered exactly like what started this whole thing, like where you're just like, yeah, let's start a podcast.
Yeah. It started in California, believe it or not. And like a lot of my listeners, like the majority, just barely the majority, is still on the West Coast, which is weird because I've been back here for 3 or 4 years. But my family and I moved to Southern California. I worked for LAPD backgrounds as a civilian background investigator, and in the unit, there's like 30 people, and there was sworn intermingled, but also a lot of retired guys from LAPD or surrounding cities would go on to backgrounds for like a second career to kind of supplement their retirement. And I would sit and have lunch with these guys. And these guys are like, to me, they were like rock stars of the police world. Like Jay Moberly sat right next to me. He did like 40 plus years in robbery homicide for LAPD, which is like one of the most elite law enforcement units in the country, and saw like the most insane stuff. And some of the guys that were on even before him, older gentlemen, their stories were like, I'm talking like stories like, yeah, high speed chase. I wake up in the passenger seat, my partner's firing out the window while we're going down the 10. I'm like,
Don't do that. Don't do that.
okay,
Yeah.
this is like the 60s. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what? So
That's an alarm clock, man. That's
yeah,
an alarm
yeah.
clock. Yeah.
Have a heart attack. So there's all these from the olden days to like to present time. There was so many stories I heard that were, I would sit there and have lunch with these guys. I'm like, damn, if someone was a fly in the wall and they could actually hear some of the like insane, horrible, terrifying, humorous things cops have to deal with, there's no way it would be hard not to appreciate them more. Like just these guys, like they gave their own wellness to this job.
Yeah.
Like they just, I mean, some of them had been in 5 or 6 shootouts, killed 5 or 6 people, and kept going. All good shootings, all justified. Just nuts. And I thought, you know what, this, I should get this out there, because the climate for police is not getting any better. And imagine if I did this and I have all these guys here that could be on the show. And like we said, I'm like a podcast geek. Like I like podcasts. I consume a ton. At the time I was consuming a ton. And I was like, you know what? I want to do it the right way. So I took John Lee Dumas. I don't know if you know him in the podcast world, Entrepreneur on Fire. He had like a free 2-week-long course to kind of get you into his world, to then of course he'll offer you stuff. And I found a lot of value in it. And I did each step just as he laid it out, got a clear mission, a clear, like how to do a show, like, don't just bring your buddies on and put a blue Yeti in the center of the table and drink beers and think that like because you find the banter witty, like
Mhm.
you guys aren't gonna. You're not Joe Rogan.
I got a buddy that I'm trying to fight back with that. Like I'm trying to have him on because of his insight, and he's like, "Dude, why don't we just like talk about stuff?" I'm like,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe at some point with a theme, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, because that is fun, and I do that. We have 2 live streams a month, and I do that with Ken Roybal.
Mhm. Yeah.
We keep it on topic,
It's
but
different though.
it's a
Yeah.
lot looser, and everybody kind of already knows us, so
Mhm.
it works. But it took years to get that trust with the audience. So John Lee Dumas is just like, listen, get a good professional intro, talk about what the show's about, tell them what they're going to hear, bring the guest on. Like, don't go into these diatribes right away, anyways, of like your personal life and all this stuff. Give them what you're advertising to start, and then when you have a relationship, and like now I'll get emails and people will be like, "Hey, you should do a podcast like with your wife," or like, "You don't talk about your personal life that much. It'd be fun to hear a personal like what's going on with you." To me, which was shocking. I'm like, what am I going to?
Yeah.
What am I going to share? And they're like, well, it'd be cool to hear your wife talk about like what it's been like. And so I think I might actually even do that, just like a little 10 or 20-minute episode for maybe just do it today or tomorrow for Christmas. Because
Yeah.
I don't want to drop a interview on Christmas. Mine drop on Wednesday.
Yeah.
You know how the numbers go.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people are going to download podcast. Hopefully,
Right.
hopefully you all doing something a little cooler than listen to us on Christmas Day.
Right. So it's kind of like I don't want to do that to a guest. So I'm like, I'll do something on my own. So that's kind of how it started and how it kind of built up. And when I started the first year, it was, I don't know. I mean, I remember the first year I had one day when it spiked to 75 downloads, and I was on like seventh heaven, man. I was like 75 in one day.
Yeah.
Boom. And still, I mean, that's 75 people. You just threw this out into the ether. You're in the world of entertainment, you're a nobody, and people are listening. I did it for a year. I grinded for a year, and then I just, I think we moved again, and I just kind of like got tired because it's an interview show, so I'm always scheduling people.
Mm-hmm.
And I took like a long time off, almost a year. And then one night I was like, let me check on the podcast because I didn't deactivate the host. Like it was still out there, it was still live.
Yeah.
And the last 6 months, it was getting like 50 to 200 downloads a day with not posting.
Wow.
And there was all these messages like, hey, when is this show coming back? This show's cool, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I am a fool. Like, I am a fool to have given up so easy. I went against everything they said, it's going to be a grind. Make sure you believe them while you're doing it and yada, yada. And then after a year when I didn't get the ego stroke I wanted, I was like, this isn't worth it. And then, so I came back strong, booked people, started posting regularly. And from that point on, it climbed and climbed. And, now I'm getting, 25 to 30,000 a month people listening, which is, I never thought it would get to that. It actually even makes me nervous sometimes when there's that, it's almost easier when it was like, I know 25 people are going to get this episode, but then when it's thousands, you're like, oh, I don't want to turn anybody off or say anything weird. And that has happened. I have had people on, I have had guests on that like old school dudes, like they'll just say something like, flippantly or like just kind of like they're old. Some of these guys are like 70.
It's always been an old person thing to be like, did they just say that?
Yeah, like one guy came on and he was like from the South, from Alabama. Great stories. But he was like, they had a black woman in their unit,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a diner that they all couldn't go to because she was black.
Mm.
And this was in the 80s. So
That's
I'm like,
crazy.
in the 80s? He's like, yeah. I'm like, whoa, dude, that is crazy. Because I grew up in the Northeast where like that hasn't been a thing in my life. I'm 45. It's not been a thing in my lifetime.
Yeah.
So I was like, dude, that's insane. And he goes, you know what? In the end, we didn't go there much because of that. Didn't go there much. And then he said, but then we said, you know what? She's a cop like we are. She should be able to go in there. And on face value, they confronted the situation and fixed it. But it wasn't because she was black, because they were being racist, because she was a cop and she wasn't allowed. So to me, hearing the story from an older guy, I take it all in and I go, I get what he's saying, whatever.
Yeah.
But to some people, it was like, hey, this guy wasn't standing on the right soapbox. And it's like, give him a break, man. He grew up in the South and he's like 75. Like, But
Context
that
is important, right? Like it's like that could have been a very courageous thing for him to challenge some of the narratives that he's been fed forever, right? It's like
right.
what you're surrounded by. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I totally get that. And I'm not, I'm not super sensitive to PC issues. I'm like, okay, yeah, hey, that's so it was fascinating to me that was going on in the 80s. I'm like, dude, you're blowing my mind. That's
That's
horrible.
pretty nuts. Yeah.
Yeah, nuts.
Yeah.
But yeah, like things like that will come up and I'm just not the guy to go stop right there and be like, that is kind of a sideways racist comment. You know what I mean? It's just not going to happen in the interview. It's like let the
Yeah.
people go and people
Mhm.
can judge themselves. And I've never had anything beyond that. I've never had like a really bad comment because I wouldn't put that out there. Someone came on and was just like, a super racist or misogynist or whatever. But yeah, little stuff like that I don't even think about. And then I'll start getting comments on it and I'm like, I don't even remember. I'm like, what are
Mm.
you talking about?
Sure.
And I'll go back and listen and be like, oh, okay. So when your audience gets bigger, you do reach like, I'm really grateful I'm reaching more liberal people. Like I get a lot of emails from people that are like, hey, I had no idea. And this podcast is great. Like I've literally just got an email recently and the guy got arrested. He's like, I got arrested recently, unfortunately, because I was really, really dumb.
Mm.
But beforehand, I'm not a cop. I'm not in that world at all. But I've been listening so much that when the cops arrested me, I went peacefully. I told them I understand they're doing their job and that I put them in a bad spot and that I shouldn't have done this. And then he goes on the ride to the station, I was telling them about your podcast. I'm like, dude, this is unbelievable.
Dude, that is, but there's so much cool. Like there, I hear ownership, I hear
Yeah.
community engagement and like empathy and also like education, right? The understanding where the guy's just like, I messed up, and also I totally understand what came after, like subsequent because of my actions, like,
Right.
and then also check out this cool podcast, guys, in the back of the
Unbelievable.
car.
I'm like,
Yeah, that's
brother,
legit.
that's
Best
so great.
advocate. Yeah. Yeah, there's so much of what you shared that I think is helpful for everybody. At the time of this recording, as you mentioned, like Christmas is right around the corner, coming up, but it's just a recognition that we got to stay patient with ourselves in whatever our endeavor is, and that might be police work, especially in the last few years where it's understandable. It's totally get it, right? The cynicism of like, what are we even doing out here? It feels like
Yeah.
a revolving door, criminal justice, what have you. But remember like your why. Remember it is the small wins. There's no small win that can be, I think, over celebrated. Because even recently, like talking to somebody on the show about, I remember when I came in, as most people do, extremely idealistic, and then
Sure.
having that first kind of, I suppose, juvenile gang member interaction, where he turned himself in and to me, and that was my like that call I was handling. We had that really solid heart to heart, right? That we all have at some point in our careers, and hopefully we don't give up on these things, but all the way to juvenile and booking and like telling him like, hey, you're doing good, you're already on the right path, and just keep doing you. And then within weeks, see his face on a bunch of bulletins. I was like, man, that really hurt me. That was really
Yeah.
like, I suppose like I'm not like I put myself out there, I'm doing my job, but I emotionally like was invested in this kid. And it is like a sucker punch in some ways when you learn these
Yeah.
things. And again, it's not to say give up on it. It is to say just be recognizing of the balance of that. But also like patient with the process in that, like, even if it's police work or like your personal health, with New Year's right around the corner. I love how you shared just that like podcast win, because if we're all honest with ourselves, like before you started the thing, if someone told you, hey, you're going to have like 20, 50 downloads, you're like, no way, people really want to hear me and what I have to say and
Right.
what I'm working on. Because I'm the same, right? Like comparison is the thief of joy. And so that's where I'm at, though. I'm trying to be aggressive about doing what I can to grow in a meaningful way, but also trying to keep myself in check, to not lose myself in what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. Like, let's not just get, for those that want to take control of their health, like don't scroll Instagram so long that you feel like, like you're useless. It's like, just get
Right.
moving, right? Just start walking, start picking up something that's uncomfortable.
Yep.
Don't go 2 days in battle ropes and box jumps and hurt yourself. Like, just start where you're at, and then and slowly grow. It's going to be more meaningful, right?
Totally. And I experienced that myself, like, cause I was an athlete in high school and I was into weightlifting and I got away from it. And then, last year I just started just what you said. I was like, let me just go for a walk. Like I don't move my body enough. So
Mm.
I just started walking, and I was like, I got into walking and let me count my steps. That's just good. I bet you I could hit 10,000 a day. And
Yeah.
then that led into like, I'm like, man, I used to be like stronger. I used to like have like shoulder caps and stuff. And then I got into like the kettlebell a little.
Mm-hmm.
And that felt really good. Like feeling sore felt good. Like the next
Yeah.
day in the cruiser, being like, oh, like
Yeah.
I can
It's
feel it a little.
accomplishment. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you feel a little bit better. It's addictive. You start like, so you're absolutely right. That's great advice. Just start something, because it's going to lead into something else, and it's only going to be good for you.
Yeah. I love that, man. We covered a lot of ground, but I do want to ask, in your 6 years of podcasting, sharing story, highlighting people, and hearing these sometimes most significant events in their careers, parlayed with your own career and insights, like what would you say like are some of the things that jump out at you, what you want law enforcement officers to hear, right? Like combining all these insights, and for those coming in or those that just need to keep maintaining and keep their head up, uh, what sticks with you?
I think that I don't want to sound cliche or corny, but like I think we lose what you do matters a lot. And I see that all the time when I have a normal cop on who does not have a book and who's not on TV, and the response I get from the calls they've been on to the average Joe, the citizen that is blissfully unaware of what you deal with, is shocked and impressed by what you do. They really are, man. And we're just sucked into the police culture where it's like, it's all very normal, and it's all very, that wasn't even a hot call, man. You didn't even shoot your gun or whatever. Like, yeah,
Mhm.
there was a half an hour standoff, but he went peacefully. Like, well, yeah, your heart was jacked the whole time, and anything could have happened. When people hear these stories about all this stuff, they're super impressed. They really are. The non-law enforcement people are like, damn, I can't believe these guys like agreed to do this. And they look
Yeah.
at their own local police department differently. So I would say, like, guys, it really is impressive, like the stuff the cops are doing out there. And I look at agencies around me and I hear the calls. I'm on a countywide broadcast system for the radio. I scan, and I think it all the time. When I hear something coming on and it's not in my district or area, I'm like, damn, good for them. Like that was a rough one. So yeah, it matters a lot, and it's an ancient and important profession, and we need it. People are not people. People do best through all civilization with law and order, and you guys are holding that line. And I thank God that there's people that want to do it, and there's people that actually listen to our podcast, and it in some way motivates them or gives them comfort that they're doing the right thing.
Yeah. Well said, man. Well said. Well, Steve, thank you so much for coming on, and long overdue. But please tell the listeners where they can find you, and any closing thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. They can go to any podcast platform. Right, my water pump comes on. I got a water pump in my basement right there, professional studio. So anywhere you can get podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, all those places. It's also on YouTube if you want to see the video. It's on there. And thingspolicey.com if you want to be a guest. I implore you. I always need to feed the beast. Sign up. Come on. I'm sure you got good stories. We can chat and get you scheduled. And yeah, that's it, man. Merry Christmas. And I have to say, man, I'm a fan of yours, and please keep doing what you're doing. It's good stuff.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Appreciate the connection, and yeah, we'll connect again soon.
All right, brother.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.